I speak in the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. A friend of mine moved to Australia in the 1970s, and in my conversation with him recently, he told me in the early 2000s how he had gone for a teaching position in Australia. He was told he was not suitable for the position, despite the fact that he had several Australian degrees and experience. Around the same time, when I was working as a priest in the parish of Mudgee, a young Aboriginal woman came to me, arrived at our church office to see if I could help her mum. Her mother lived in government housing and had been without water for more than 3 weeks. She could not get the local council and landlord to do anything, despite several requests. I called the council and told them about this woman whom they knew. I said she was my parishioner and expressed anger at her treatment. The water was back on that day, but I am a white European male in a position of influence, and she was a woman, the first Australian. Well, I'd be surprised and disappointed if stories like these do not make you feel great distaste and anger. We could probably name many other stories and have many other instances where these injustices make us respond similarly. I could speak, for example, about the over 1,500 people, mostly asylum seekers, in detention in Australia and similar things. We might face these and other truths inwardly groaning or outwardly snorting, as I will explain in a while. Truth-telling, truth-hearing is not easy to hear. Well, distaste, anger, and this kind of deep groaning or snorting, if you feel that, you're in good company with Jesus and in Jesus' encounter with the leper today. What we read said something like this: a leper came to Jesus begging him, kneeling him and saying, "If you choose, you can make me clean." Moved with compassion, our translation says, Jesus stretched out his hand, touched him and made him clean. Well, while our reading from Mark's Gospel has been translated as moved by compassion, it's quite possible, as some manuscripts describe it, that he said moved by anger. There is support for this sense of being moved by anger in what happens next. For example, in verse 43, it goes on to say after the healing that Jesus sternly warned the leper and sent him away at once, saying, "Don't tell anyone about this, but show yourself to the priest." This stern warning is where the snorting comes in. I believe the Greek comes from a word connected to horse snorting. So it's a sort of guttural response to this situation that Jesus is facing. Is he angered at the leper? This is the perplexing question that commentators ask. Well, I want to side with those who read this as Jesus being angry. The encounter with the leper, in that encounter, Jesus sees someone who is crippled not only by disease, but by human laws and mores that keep him aside from the community life and from the life of God. So Jesus' anger is not so much at the leper, but focused on the powers that hold creation and creatures in their life-sapping thrall. These powers are expressed in all kinds of ways, in illness, of course, but it also in other ways, by prejudices that we take on board and values that do harm to other folk, to other communities. So my opening stories were about people who themselves have little or no control over responses made to them, the prejudice expressed to them that is debilitating, or to the institutions that are bearers of such bigotry, as we've seen recently with the Collingwood Football Club, where tribalism and racism just continues to be denied. We should rightly snort and express distaste every time we see these inhumane powers or attitudes. We might even say that this is the result of the deep compassion of God that we have within ourselves. But Jesus is moved with anger also for another reason here. His anger toward the leper perhaps is strange, and it does seem to also be expressed to him or around him at the same time. The Greek, again, is a little more explicit than we have it from our NRSV. The Greek suggests that Jesus threw him out or cast out the leper. It's as though Jesus shakes his head in anger, throws the leper out, and demands that he tell no one that he came and was healed. It's as if Jesus also knew that the leper would start blabbing, as he did. The leper went out and began proclaiming it freely and spread the word so that Jesus could no longer go about the town openly, and he stayed out in the country. In so speaking against the request and intention of Jesus, which Jesus knew he would do, he went and told everyone, and as a consequence, Jesus' mission is thwarted or derailed, because what is being spread is that here is a wonder worker, a healer. Populism and distorted half-truths are dangerous. They are dangerous to the mission of God. It's a bit like Jesus' comment to Peter. When Peter tried to stop him moving towards Jerusalem, he says to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan." This is the message not so much to Peter, but to the powers that would lead us or prevent us from following the path of Jesus and lead us away from that path that Jesus is going in this instance. Jesus does not use miracle healing to win people over. Rather, his eyes are on the greater work of God, and this healing simply points to the greater intention of God for broken humanity to deal with the powers that keep us bound and restricted from being who we might be in God. So the healing of the leper in some ways is not a story about Jesus, but a story about God and about this wider realm of love and justice. And it's why Jesus always pointed to the Father away from himself, because this is the greater thing that he is on about, the reign of God in the world and revealing that reign in our midst. So this is also a message to us. Our sense of the good can destroy the movement of God's commonwealth when we get in the way, as it were. And the way is a costly way, the costly commonwealth of God, which asks of us our life to be given and to speak up when we see injustice, or to live out in order that injustices might be undone, for example. The path of Christian ministry is not wonder-working, but slow-working yeast that brings to the world truthfulness, or holds up to the world a mirror that it might see its untruthfulness, or indeed to the church, or to Christian living, or religiosity that will show the falsity of those lives and lies. Truth-telling is more than words and uppity moralisms. Truth-telling, as with the leper, is about engaging in loving kindness, in building relationships across all kinds of human divides and divisions. Compassionate anger is good and necessary, and we need to hold it, and we also need to express it and work towards changing that towards which we are feeling so distressed, and for those things which need changing. The sting in the tail in this story, and I'll leave you here, is that we learn about Jesus' anger as the leper, knowing he'll blab anywhere, everywhere. It's that when we point to other sins, we must also be conscious of our own frailties as well. We know that Australians are not the only ones guilty of prejudice. It's a human trait. That doesn't mean we make any less effort to speak up and address it. But we are aware, too often, we should be aware of our own frailties and failings. Finally, however, this being aware of the injustices and the stress that might cause us in terms of not knowing what to do when we are surrounded often by such great stresses, and all we can do is little step by step. We should also learn here from the way of Jesus. What did he do when he saw what he was doing being betrayed, as it were, or prevented by the leper going out and telling everyone about his healing? He went out to the country. And so it is. We too need to have those times where we simply set apart ourselves in order to help recalibrate our whole sense of who we are and who we are in God. As a community of faith, we also need to do this, to set time aside to recalibrate our life in order that we might restore and again move on with those things which God calls us to do. Lent is the time we're approaching, where we can, as it were, stay out in the country, where we can step aside, if we can, from the busyness of life, even a little bit each day during Lent, to make time to recalibrate and to re-strengthen our lives. We all need time with God. We will get righteously angry, compassionate angry about things we see and experience, but we need that time with God to strengthen, to reflect, and to see aright once more. May God bless you this Lent, and may you set aside the time where we can set ourselves and our vision aright with God this Lent.